5, broken up in various sections of the CPD standard that we would like to take you through today. In attendance or part of the team that will be when we do the rules of engagement. If we have not covered any aspect of the rules, such as muting, such as video, such as etc., if you could come in, I know that Yashin will be covering that as item number 3 on the some members of the facilitating team will be joining us during the course of the afternoon as they are attending council meeting. So that will be up until 1400 hours or 2 p.m., after which they will be joining us. People that we expect to join us during the course of the afternoon is Mr. Mpho Ramahulu. Mr. Mpho Ramahulu is part of the ECSA CPD task team, which was critical in the development of this particular training program or workshop that is based on the standard that you may know has been implemented by ECSA since April 2021. So what we are doing today really is taking stakeholders to various aspects of this particular standard. Mpho Ramahulu, who's a senior manager at Transnet, is part of that CPD task team that had developed the training program on the CPD standard as projected. Mr. Ramahulu holds a master's in engineering as well as a MBA, and has been involved in various committees of ECSA, one being the Central Registration Committee, and is also currently serving in the Investigation Committee as well as the CPD committees. Another member that will be joining us during the course of the afternoon is Mrs. Lebo Maphumulo, also a CPD task team member, who has served at various capacities within the ECSA environment. She was a previous member of the ECSA Council for 2 consecutive terms, and has served as a reviewer, assessor, and moderator, as well as adjudicator for various other bodies, and is currently serving as a member of the CPD task team. Mrs. Maphumulo also holds various membership and affiliations with the Engineering Council as a professional engineer, the South African Institute of Electrical Engineers, and is a member of technical groups for the International Electrotechnical Commission, member of the working group of the International Council on Large Electric Systems. So we are happy to have Mrs. Maphumulo as a member of the CPD task team, as well as a member of this facilitating team for this afternoon's workshops. The next member of the presenting team and facilitating team is Mr. Yashin Prisma, who is a professional engineer and is currently serving in various capacities. One of those would be being the chairman of the Engineering Education Standing Technical Committee of the Federation of African Engineering Organization. He's also an executive committee member of the Commonwealth Engineers Council. He's an advisor to the president of the World Federation of Engineering Organizations. He's a board member of UNESCO's International Center for Engineering Education. And lastly, one of the other roles that Mr. Bridgman is involved in is being a co-chair of the Africa Asia Pacific Engineering Council. various also currently occupying the role of being the chairperson of the ECSA CPD task team, and has been instrumental in the development of this particular program that we will be running you through this afternoon. Those are the three members that we expect us to join during the course of the day. But the sessions will kick off the session with Yashin just taking us through the objectives of the workshop, what we'd like to achieve, as well as the rules of engagement. Without much ado, over to you, Yashin. You are on mute.
I said, thank you very much. I just wanted to, before I start my presentation, I just wanted to ensure that everyone can view the first screen of the PowerPoint presentation. Is that clear on your side, Ivan?
That's clear, Yashin.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you very much for those introductions. So today we will take you through the standard for continuing professional development, and what we will be doing is that all our documents that we have related to this that I will be presenting today are available on ECSA's website, and we will share that with you at the end of the presentation. But I thought maybe before we start, I just wanted to introduce a few rules of engagement in terms of how we engage with this presentation today. We would like to have it as interactive as possible. So, what we would do is that we would also ask you a few questions that some of which you can indicate in the chat. I will not be able to view the chat for the session that I'm presenting. So I will ask Ivan if there are any questions that come through if presentation as the EPA of 2000. And if we look at section 22 of this EPA, it mentions two main aspects related to this presentation around CPD. The first one is that registered persons must apply in a prescribed manner for renewal of registration at least 3 months prior to an expiry date of registration. And the second aspect that is mentioned is that the council, which is the Engineering Council of South Africa, may determine the conditions for renewal of registration. So the ECSA then defines very specific rules for CPD. And these CPD rules are the requirements for the renewal of registration. So that's how CPD fits in terms of the registration process. Now, in terms of legislative frameworks that you may come across that's related to CPD, so there's a quality assurance aspect under the EPA, which is required to be conducted by the Engineering Council of South Africa. You'll also find that we've had a board notice around 2014, and more recently the board notice 86 of 2017, which has to do with the CPD and renewal of registration rules, which were published. And then we also have the Cpd Standard, and this Cpd Standard really was to allowed ECSA to provide not just the rules in terms of how licensed bodies can be recognized, CPD providers can be verified, and CPD activities can be validated. Now, I would just like to bring your attention to three words, and those three words that we mentioned are the words recognized, verified, and validated. So what ECSA does is that we recognize CPD licensed bodies, we verify service providers, and we validate activities. And we've chosen those words specifically related to those bodies or organizations. And ECSA is also expected at its discretion and to conduct audits around the CPD standard around every 3 years, or at ECSA's discretion. There are some other applicable legislative frameworks that you may want to familiarize yourself with, and that is the Identification of Engineering Works and the South African Qualifications Authority, which is SAQA. There are a few related documents to that. And you should be able to pick up many of these documents on the ECSA's website. So I would just like to also introduce to you that ECSA is a signatory of the International Engineering Alliance. And the International Engineering Alliance is really an international body that has what we call as educational accords and competency recognition or mobility agreements. And in terms of those educational accords, we have 3 of them, which is the Washington, Sydney, and Dublin Accord. And the Washington, I will just focus on one of them for now. The Washington Accord, more specifically, is related to the undergraduate engineering qualification. So these accords allow recognition of those educational requirements, which are set by those accords across the different countries and across signatories. Then we also have what we call as the Competency Recognition Mobility Agreements. And these agreements are really placed between the signatories of the various countries to allow mobility of engineers to work across those different countries. So what is normally set in these competency and mobility agreements is that the specific competencies for engineers. And in addition to those overarching competencies, we are also required to meet the local competency requirements of a specific area. But what you'd find in terms of the competency agreements that we have is that one of the competencies or aspects that is a requirement is the aspect about lifelong learning. So I would now like to maybe stop my presentation on my end, and maybe I would just like to ask you a question in terms of, what is your view or opinion about lifelong learning? And do you see any relevance of it in CPD? So I just want to throw that question to the floor. I know we've just started around lunchtime, so my responses will be a little, maybe a little bit slower, but I just thought that let me just stop at this juncture and let me hear from you from the floor. It will also test whether all the modalities around the technical aspects of this presentation is working. So if I can just get your views around lifelong learning and what you see it as and how it relates to CPD. If I can have some comments from the floor, please. Ivan, if you can just facilitate this for me while I have the presentation open. You can also drop some of your comments onto the chat. During this presentation, we want to have it as interactive as possible. So I would very like to hear your comments.
Yashin, I'm not sure if you are able to see the chat.
No, unfortunately, okay. I can't for some reason.
All right. Maybe what I'll do is just share with you what I see on this side. From Francois Blichnoot, it's a good thing. Skills transfer, however, should take preference. And I'm intentionally adding a question mark at the end, just to invite an opinion. Alti has her hand up. Artie?
Thank you, Chair. But what I think what happened over the years is that we've learned from our mistakes. We think that after you've had a qualification that you can just stagnate. But although we do get experience, and that experience are implemented along the way as you go on, I think it's very important that there's a continuous professional development where guys specifically take note of. We know everything is changing drastically every day as we speak. So for me, when you think about continuing professional development, that is lifelong learning. I cannot even imagine that in any profession, you cannot have something like continuing professional development because you will definitely stagnate. So from our side, we're a professional body as well, but we're non-statutory. The best thing ever that could have happened to us is that there is a huge focus on CPD, and for me, it is equivalent. It's absolutely parallel to lifelong learning. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Alti. I would really like to hear Francois' comments around what he means by skills transfer. Francois, can you share that with us? Francois, if you are online. Okay. So,
may I chip in here, please, Jay?
Yes.
Yes, we have you on.
Yeah, my hand has been up when you were still presenting on the slides. If you could just go back a slide previous to the international recognition. We were talking about the licensing verification, recognition, verification, and validation. Just for the sake of clarity, the recognition of the CPD licensing bodies. Now, I know ECSA does that, and your by default licensed bodies are your recognized voluntary associations, universities. I don't know if there's organizations as well, I doubt it. But when it comes to, and this is just for clarity, verification of CPD service providers, surely that sits with the voluntary associations or the licensed bodies. They verify the service providers to see whether they meet the requirements or not. And then they manage the process of the validation of the CPD activities, which they then submit back to ECSA. Is my understanding correct, or is ECSA now going to verify CPD service providers and getting into that realm?
Okay, so I will definitely clarify that within my presentation, but your assertion is actually correct in that ECSA, under normal circumstances, would recognize the CPD providers, who would then, so it's the CPDs, would recognize CPD licensed bodies, and it would be those licensed bodies that verify CPD service providers, and it is those licensed bodies that validate CPD activities. There are some exceptions, but we will take you through that.
Right, great, yeah, because that is a direct impact on your EPD 7 form and a few others that's related to that. Thank you, Jay.
Yes, thank you.
I think I said, sorry to come in, I can see my mind be recognized. To add on what the previous speaker has alluded to, is it an organization or a VA being a ECSA CPD licensed body and apply again being a CPD service provider at the same time, holding the two things? You are a CPD body, CPD licensed body, and being a verified CPD service provider. Is that okay? Is that allowed?
Okay, so let me cover that question as I move through the next part of my presentation. I've noted your question. I will definitely have it covered. Okay,
thanks a lot. Then the last one is the continuous learning and all that, the lifelong learning. Yes, we do support that, especially for the registered people like me and you. We know like we must continue learning so that we can able to renew our license after 5 years and all that. But how about the people that are in the industry and are practicing at the moment? There is no continuity on their side, but then they're doing this critical work and all those things. The worry part from my side is like it seems as if as an organization or as a statutory body, we are not enforcing anything when coming to continuous learning, because I might be an engineer for the past 30 years and I'm not registered with it. I don't care about learning anything, but I'm still pushing, I'm still doing and frustrating the graduates that are coming in there. I know what's happening. I've been subjected to come the youngsters from the university, they heard about this ECSA from their VAs and they want to get into, but find that they're getting a frustration again from the workplace and all that. So this is a bit of a concern if we can look at that going forward. From the industry point of view, I know that 90% of people are not registered. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, so you've raised 3 points, but 2 of them I would like to maybe focus on. But the second one, I think maybe we'll focus on at the end of the presentation, which is around if you are not a registered person, how do we deal with CPD? Because from your assertion, you are stating that there are many individuals that are not registered with the Engineering Council. So I think let me make a note of that, and we would address that one. You've also mentioned an aspect related to individuals that may be frustrated. I didn't quite get that point. Could you elaborate on that?
I was just saying like the graduates, they come from the universities, they are under training, under somebody who's not registered. Obviously, they won't be supported in terms of being supervised. And I come there as a youngster, I'm planning to do my ECSA, and then here's your supervisor, direct supervisor, he's not registered. Obviously, you won't pass that. I mean, you are going to meet a hindrance or stumbling block and all that. You won't be supported. Then this will continue to damage the profession going forward.
Okay. Okay, I am noting that point. I think we'll also cover that under general. Okay, thank you so much. So now for the next part of my presentation, I would, and Ivan, you may just let me know if there's any hands up or if there's any additional issues I need to address on the chat. So I'm just going to go through the next part of the standard, and you'd find on the left-hand side of the at the top end of the presentation would have numbers, and those numbers would relate to the specific numbering in the standard. So in terms of the purpose of this overarching standard, what we found as ECSA is that in the past we allowed for the various aspects around CPD to continue as is, and there was some guidance around that. But if you look at the Act specifically, which has an audit component, is that ECSA decided to now clarify various aspects around CPD and how it should be done. So we have now outlined what we now call as CPD license bodies and the verification process of service providers and validation, the validation process for activities. And one of the reasons that we had to do that in a bit more detail is so that if we had to regulate or audit this environment, it would be easier to do so once those processes are outlined. So what we have at this point in time is that we've outlined a process to apply to be a licensed body or a service provider. We've also have supporting documents for validation, but we also have an appeal process for licensed bodies and CPD providers in cases of rejection. And the other purpose of the standard is it really provides more clarity in terms of the rules and the implementation of the rules that ECSA has on CPD. Okay. Now what I'll be taking you through a little bit later on is also the relationships between these different aspects around the license bodies and service providers and validation of activities. And my team members will take you through some of those details in terms of the requirements for those specific aspects. Now, in terms of the principles around CPD, and I know that the first part of the presentation has to do with the Act, so I'm going to read some of these words exactly as is, but if you look at Section 13K of the Engineering Professions Act, and this is the part that empowers the Council to determine the CPD requirements, okay, as well as and training in consultation with the voluntary associations and registered persons. Now, in terms of the EPA, the Council is also directed to serve and protect the safety and health of the public by doing two things. One is establishing and maintaining minimum standards of practice, and the other aspect is expected to establish and maintain knowledge and skills together with standards of professional ethics amongst registered persons in South Africa. So the first one is around standards of practice, and the second one is around a process to maintain knowledge and skills. And there, you'll also see that in the Act, there's various aspects that are introduced, such as the aspect around ethics. Now, later on, I'm going to introduce you to some nuances around some of the wordings that are in the Act and some of the definitions that have changed as we have it today based on research. And I also wanted to also make you aware of some of those nuances. So if you could kindly indicate to me at this point in time, is that many of you have mentioned that we need lifelong learning, but I wanted to hear some of the reasons behind that. So what would be some of the reasons behind CPD? Why do we really need CPD? I know here it says that we need to maintain our knowledge, but the question is, why do we need to do that? Is it more important now than it has been before, or is it remaining the same? I would just like to hear your views around why do you think we need to maintain CPD over and above just a compliance issue, because I've heard that come across. So if I can get some of your comments around that. If anyone would like to come to the floor, that would be great.
Yes, my hand's up again.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it's your hand again. Yeah, nice seeing you again. Look, for me, unfortunately, there is a negative component that needs to be addressed through continual professional development. And it's closely linked to failures. If you look at technology and the pace that it moves at, I think there's some of the programs that it takes them 9 days, then it's outdated already. So failures is unfortunately one of the biggest ways to counteract failures by instituting a continual professional development program by, and I'm going to use the word very carefully, forcing people to stay abreast with what the latest technologies are. We've seen it in the medical fraternity where CPD actually really started. The technologies and the methods that they use in various operations. The hernia operation is an example of that. The old school one versus the modern one, and the people that died from the old method versus the new method is a prime example where they had to force people to, and once again I'm using the word carefully here, forced, because CPD should be a culture, it should not be a forced scenario. So I think one of the many components of that is to prevent failures and to keep the older generation that's been doing it for a gazillion years the same way, upskilling them to the modern way of thinking. And it's becoming more prevalent as we move along. You'll see with Elon Musk and all of those kind of new technologies that's come out, and that sits very close to engineering. I think that should be motivation enough for anybody to participate in it.
Okay, and I think you mentioned a very important point, the aspect around compliance versus culture, and I maybe just thought of maybe just asking another question, and maybe you can post your comments on the chat. around this specific one is that while I'm going through the presentation, you can still continue with just answering this question. Is that if CPD is becoming such an important aspect, or let me just call it lifelong learning or maintaining specific standards, and maintaining your knowledge and skills given the pace of technological development. My question is, whose responsibility who should be responsible for CPD? And maybe if you can just post your comments on the chat around that one. So thank you very much for that, Johan. Ivan, if you can just monitor the screen, I cannot see it. So if there's any questions or comments, just stop me and then I would move along. So
just one.
Yes.
Just one. Yashin from, is it Ansar?
Yes.
Or would you rather make a comment in the chat, Ansar?
No, I just wanted to add on the previous speaker. In short, as an engineer, we don't give a prescription like doctors. So it's very important to keep on learning. We've got a lot of modifications. I mean, we're doing things that other people can't see. So continuous learning is very, very important, I mean, to add up on that one. And we'll go back to that question that I've already highlighted, that for those who are not falling within these things, what are they learning going forward and all that?
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for that. Now, in the document, you would find that there are also some principles that have been indicated that underline CPD. And in terms of this, the first aspect is more around compliance, and this is an aspect that a registered person is expected to renew their license, and in terms of that renewal, CPD is a requirement. Now, in terms of the rules and code of conduct, there's two aspects that are mentioned. The first one is that registered persons are expected to practice strictly within the area of competence. So there is an accountability aspect on the individual to recognize that they have the relevant skills and they maintain their competence and enhance their proficiency, and that they keep abreast with developments in their field of expertise so that they're able to practice in their area of competence. Now, what you'd find is that in many of the documents, you may find a few words that come up. And this word that comes up a lot is the word called competency or competence. And there are nuances to that. So if from a research perspective, there's many definitions for competence. The ones that we are using today is what we call as knowledge, skills, and attributes. Okay, so competence, as we reflect them in our current definition, is around knowledge, skills, and attributes that are required by any profession for them to be able to practice within their specific area. If you have any questions around that, you can post that in the chat. Now, I also wanted to allude to you that in my presentation, you'll see some nuances around this word. So just bear with me as I continue. Now, in terms of the CPD, ECSA is the sole authority for determining the profession CPD requirements. It also defines the process which delegates certain functions to different organizations and bodies around CPD, and I'll take you through that just now. And in its own capacity, ECSA also, as the sole delegator, also has the right to verify a CPD service provider or validate any activity. So as much as it can delegate these powers, it also maintains the right to do it on its own. Okay. And the second right that it has is to monitor and audit CPD licensed bodies. Now, there are many other aspects around the principles underlying CPD, but I think we've exhausted this. But in essence, the registered person has the accountability to ensure that they have maintained their competencies. Now, when I mention the word professional competencies in this slide, professional competencies in this slide in terms of world norms, means competencies that are non-technical. So if I'm talking about non-technical competencies like teamwork, like intercultural competence, like ethical behavior, those are normally referred to as professional competencies. I just wanted to allude you to that point because in the document later on, professional competencies normally refer to both technical and non-technical. But I just wanted to make sure that on this slide, the expectation is that over and above your technical competencies, you're expected to maintain your professional competencies. And professional competencies from an international perspective is normally defined as in inverted commas, non-technical competencies, which are your general skills that are required. And they are typical skills which includes certain types of management skills. Okay. So we could not change this specific slide because this is based on the founding documents of CPD and the Act. So CPD has been based on 4 pillars. The first one that they've mentioned is professional competence, but professional competence in this slide means both technical and some of the non-technical aspects. It also refers to professional attitude, values, and ethics. But I think the essence that you should get from some of these nuances is that if we can differentiate 2 aspects around competence, which are what is today known as professional competencies, which are generic skills, which includes the aspects about teamwork, management skills, and then technical competencies that are related to the technical aspects of your work. What is growing is staying abreast of global best practices. So as much as we may have local practices, it is expected that the engineer or engineering practitioner does stay abreast of international practices. So in terms of CPD, the expectation is that between your professional skills and your technical skills, that there is some balance when one develops their continuing professional development. Now, what we've also noticed is that, and there's a note at the bottom which says that CPD is not limited just to the education environment. I think somebody unmuted. Ivan, was there a question?
No, the new entrant has muted herself.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so CPD in our overarching definition is not only limited to the educational aspects, but it also includes the practical experience and training. But in this specific document, where it has to do a lot with validation of activities, those activities are based on what we call category 1, which we'll discuss later, and those are mainly educational type of activities. So in terms of the conceptual structure, I did mention those specific words around verification and validation and recognition. So ECSA, as the sole authority, delegates powers to what we call CPD licensed bodies. And I'm going to go on to the next slide here so it becomes a bit clearer. So at level 1 that we see here is that this is the area of the CPD licensed body, and the CPD licensed body can be an ECSA recognized voluntary association or what we call as an ECSA accredited higher education institution. And that could include both public and private institutions. So as long as they have an ECSA accredited program. So ECSA will delegate the licensing function by recognizing those institutions, and there are specific rules that you would need to abide to with that. In terms of level 2, the CPD licensed bodies are the ones that actually verify the CPD service providers. So CPD service providers could be, again, the voluntary association and the higher educational institution could be a provider themselves, or they may verify other providers. And then the third level, which is on the right-hand side, is that the license body, which is level 1, also validates activities, okay, which are offered by level 2, which are the verified CPD service providers. And then on level 4 is the auditing and quality assurance aspects. So it is expected that license bodies also conduct a audit and quality assurance function over the delegated activities that they have. But ECSA will at an overarching level also provide that level 4 function. So at this point, this ends my part of the presentation. So I will take some questions or comments at this point, or any clarification aspects. I will allow about maybe 30 seconds for your comments on the chat, or if anyone would like to ask any questions around this.
Yes, a question, it's me again. Is that question that I came up from the start, that is it CPD license body become a service CPD service provider at the same time? My VA is on the level 1, so which is a CPD license body. So am I allowed, or why should I apply for the level 2 again to be a CPD service provider, a verified CPD service provider?
Okay, so we've tried as far as possible to avoid any sort of conflict of interest that could arise. So remember, if you are a CPD licensed body, you can be a CPD service provider, but you are also responsible for verifying other CPD service providers. But in that process, we thought that to make that line, that conflict of interest line maybe cleaner, is that we thought that if you would like to be a CPD service provider, at this point in time, we thought that ECSA should verify you as a CPD service provider. But you can verify any other CPD service provider. So
in short, I must be ECSA CPD license body and verified. Is that mandatory for me to become a verified CPD service provider, or I can still hang in there as an ECSA CPD license body?
Yeah, yes. So if you are not offering any courses or programs or any activity or category 1 activities, as we call it, is that if you are not offering them, and if you have service providers that offer them, and you verify those service providers, and you yourself are not a service provider in itself offering the activities, then you are not obliged to apply to be a verified CPD service provider. If you want to be a verified CPD service provider, then you are obliged to make that application.
All right. No, thanks.
Okay.
It's clear now. Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thank you. So Ivan, I think if there's no questions or comments, if there are, you can just raise them to myself. Or if there's any additional comments that I may have missed for the team, you could make those at this specific point in time. What I would like to then do is to hand over to Ivan, who will take you through the next part of the presentation. So Ivan, if you can deal with the questions and comments first, and then you can continue with the presentation.
Thanks, Yashin. There is one question from Kevin. Maybe I should just cover that. We will be covering the audit and review of licensed bodies